The Arrowverse has 20 seasons, and each one of those seasons has a main villain. Now, some of these seasons also have secondary main villains, which are villains who are not really the main villains of the season, but definitely feel like they either are or they have their own contained storyline. I've done this video in the past, but this time I'm going to be a little bit more strict about what constitutes being a secondary main villain. Either they have some sort of connection to the main villain, where they kind of felt like the main villain themselves for a little bit, or they had their own contained storyline where they were the villain of that storyline. This will also include the flashback villains from Arrow throughout the first 5 seasons, as well as any other villain that falls under those categories. With that in mind, let's start the list with number 19.
We were drawn by the blood of our fallen world killers. Hand it over, and we won't spill yours.
So here we have Selena and the rest of the Dark Kryptonians, who are the creators of the main villain of the season, Rain, and near the end of the season they kind of took over for a lot of episodes, basically until the finale, and I really disliked them. Rain was so much more interesting, way more menacing, and the actress who played her was frankly a lot better than the actresses who were playing these characters. I despised the whole thing with Argo and that whole storyline, and the fact that they brought these characters back, which they didn't need to at all, really infuriates me. They're very boring characters, they're not menacing at all, and they were bad secondary main villains for the season that kind of ruined a large part of the second half of the season.
I've designed this helmet to absorb the radiation.
You want me to solar flare? That's never gonna happen.
I can't hurt you. But I can hurt him.
Lillian Luthor and Cadmus looked like they were going to be the main villains of Supergirl Season 2 until Rhea took over out of nowhere, and I'll admit, if they ended up being the main villains, then the season probably would have had a stronger structure, and maybe even a slightly better villain. That being said, I really have to emphasize slightly, because Lillian Luthor and Cadmus are not very good villains at all. Cadmus, for instance, is one of the most boring iterations of the organization I've ever seen compared to every other animated appearance they've had. Lillian Luthor is by far the least interesting of the Luthors that have appeared, so they definitely would not have been very good villains, but, you know, maybe a little bit better than Rhea.
Give me all the names of the stars.
Then let me educate you once again, dear niece. Your alliance with the humans is misplaced. Do not stand against me. I let one planet die. I will not do so again.
So very similarly to Lillian Luthor, Astra seemed like she's going to be the main villain of Supergirl Season 1 until a slightly worse villain took over in Non, who is one of my least favorite villains in the Arrowverse, or at least main villains, along with Rhea, and both of them, Astra and Lillian Luthor, are just a tiny bit better. Astra is not a very good villain at all. Outside of the personal connection to Kara, there's nothing interesting about her at all. Her plan, her motivation, the acting from the actress, everything about her is not very interesting, so in terms of her being a secondary main villain, she wasn't very good, although again, probably would have been a better villain than Non if she continued to be the villain the entire season.
You go with them, and from there you can return to Starling or go wherever else on Earth you wish.
Thank you, General Shreve.
After what you did, son, that's the least I can do.
The flashbacks of Arrow, including the villains, have the exact same track record as Arrow does in its first 5 seasons, where 1, 2, and 5 are good, but 3 and 4 are not. Season 3 of Arrow, I have my least favorite flashbacks. They're very boring, and the villain General Shreve is incredibly forgettable. Honestly, I didn't even remember he existed until looking at all the secondary main villains for this video. Because of that, he's a lot lower on the list. I don't remember him being very menacing. I don't remember his motivation and his plans being very interesting at all, and he's easily the worst of the flashback villains from Arrow Season 1 to 5.
But you chose not to die with them. I killed a few of the stragglers. My power has grown beyond your imagining. Let me show you.
Baron Ryder is only a little bit better than General Shreve, as he is at least a little bit more connected to the main storyline of the actual season, which that maybe not isn't a good thing, but I do think he has a better rivalry with Oliver. If any, his connection to the storyline is definitely stronger. He's a little bit better than General Shreve, but he definitely is not on par with the season 1, 2, and 5 flashback villains at all. He's definitely not a great villain, but I wouldn't say he's terrible either, as I guess he serves his purpose in a season and also flashback storyline that was really, really bad.
Known as the father of science, believed that for any event there was a natural cause, even if we couldn't see it. And he thought that with perfect knowledge, man could control anything.
I really think Cayden James could have been a lot better as a villain if he had a lot less episodes. He was the main villain of Season 6 for 13 out of the 23 episodes, which is the majority of the episodes, while Diaz was 10. And I honestly think if he was defeated maybe before the mid-season finale, he could have been a good secondary main villain, but now, as he took up more screen time than the main villain, and those episodes were pretty infuriating as he wasn't a very good menacing threat to Oliver or to the team, and he wasn't a physical threat at all, which was pretty frustrating for those episodes. Because of that, the only reason he's a little bit higher is because the acting from the actor and also his motivation are definitely not bad at all. He's definitely not a great villain though, so he is pretty low on the list.
You can't win this fight.
I bet I can.
Orland Dwyer, aka Cicada, I did not expect him to be on a list like this, like at the beginning of Season 5, because I thought he was going to be the main villain. We all did, which is what made his continuous defeat on the hands of Team Flash near the middle of the season so incredibly infuriating and frustrating, as he wasn't a physical or a threat at all to the team. Only after a couple episodes where he definitely was very menacing, and those episodes he wasn't bad. I would say after episode 7 where we saw his origin story, and then he was fully defeated basically by Killer Frost, every episode after that he wasn't a threat at all, which made him a very infuriating villain to follow. Thankfully, he kind of was replaced by his niece from the future, Cicada version 2, who's a lot more menacing, but as a secondary main villain, outside of the first couple episodes of Season 5, where he definitely was pretty menacing, he was definitely not a very good villain at all.
The boy has been chosen, Flash. And you will not stand before what must be.
So now we get into the villains who are actually pretty good. We went from just straight up not good to from 12 to 1 are actually pretty good, like every single one of them. First of all, we have Julian Albert, aka Alchemy, or Dr. Alchemy, who I thought was a pretty good villain, and I really liked his storyline and connection to Savitar. Technically, he is Savitar, as Savitar is just speaking through him, but I really kind of liked that twist, and I really liked how that connected to the storyline. I thought that his powers were pretty interesting, his connection to Flashpoint also pretty interesting. I think he could have been maybe a little bit more interesting, as maybe they could have made Julian Albert and his connection to Barry, that could have been some rivalry, and I honestly think he had the potential to be a main villain himself had he just upgraded his design, but still I think Dr. Alchemy is definitely not a bad villain at all.
Well, look at that. Didn't anybody tell you Halloween was 3 months ago?
Daniel Brickwell.
You have failed this city.
You seem to have failed in your maths. Can't you see there's a lot more of us than there is of you?
Brick was honestly one of the best parts of Arrow Season 3, and the middle, I would like from when Oliver died till he came back, I really liked those episodes. Aside from how Oliver got back, I really liked how Black Canary and Arsenal were on their own fighting Brick. I liked their rivalry with Brick. Brick was definitely a menacing villain, and the actor who played him was, I think, pretty good in the role. I really liked that whole storyline, and his defeat at the hands of Oliver when Oliver came back was incredibly satisfying, making Brick a pretty good villain, who was made even better in Season 7, where he returned as an inmate in the Slabside Penitentiary, where he went up against Oliver. I think that Brick is a great character and a great secondary main villain for Arrow Season 3.
Who are you?
An agent of liberty.
Ben Lockwood, aka Agent Liberty, we all thought was going to be the main villain of the season, just like Cicada, as well as another character I will go over later in this list. Agent Liberty, I think, was a pretty good secondary main villain for the episodes he was the main villain. I think that the actor who played him did a great job in the role, and although I didn't like the storyline of the season that much until Lex Luthor debuted, once he did debut, it really all fit together, and Agent Liberty was definitely a part of that, and that definitely made him a lot better as a character and as a villain. I do really like his costume and his design, and although I don't love that they made this superhero from the comics a villain, I think he definitely served his part and worked as a good secondary main villain for the Supergirl Season 4.
Supergirl is dead. What happened?
The Cosnians invaded.
Your signal was late. I was supposed to lead the attack.
No, Krasnaya Dodge. You did exactly what you were meant to.
Another character I thought could have been the main villain of Supergirl Season 4 was the Red Daughter, who I thought had a great role in this season. Again, her connection to Lex Luthor, I really liked that. It was one of my favorite parts of the season. Obviously, until Lex Luthor debuted, there wasn't really much interesting there. I didn't really like Red Daughter in that storyline, but once he did, again, same thing with Agent Liberty, he connected everything together, and because of that, it made me appreciate everything we saw with Red Daughter up to that point, and her relationship with Lex Luthor, as well as her costume, which is awesome, and a rivalry with Kara. It's all pretty good, making her a relatively great secondary main villain.
Finished, assuming that you're still alive. Now, I wouldn't bet no money on that, though. There's gonna be very little of you left for the Green Arrow to work with. Light him up.
Tobias Church served as a pretty great secondary main villain in the episodes leading up to Prometheus, just becoming the main villain completely. I think that he had a relatively good rivalry with Oliver Queen. I think his role in this season works really well. He also had a really good rivalry with Rene Ramirez, which was crazy. Like the episode where he was torturing him, that was insane. I really liked Tobias Church as a villain. Honestly, I would have liked to see more of him, but I think that his death and the amount of episodes he had in the season were pretty perfect, and the fact that he revealed to Prometheus that Oliver Queen is the Green Arrow, whether or not Prometheus knew it already, I really liked basically everything they did with Tobias Church, who I'm pretty sure is an original character in this season.
Higher, can you fix that?
Well, everyone lies about their age, bro.
Can you please stop fooling around?
Nora doll, what's the point of living if you can't have a bit of fun?
Well, I'm not enjoying myself. I'm annoyed.
Hi, annoyed. I'm Dad. Right, that's good.
Damien Darhk went from being the main villain of Arrow Season 4 to a recurring villain in Legends of Tomorrow Season 1, to one of the main villains in Legends of Tomorrow Season 2, to one of the secondary main villain in Legends of Tomorrow Season 3, and honestly, out of all those seasons, his best was probably Legends of Tomorrow Season 3, where he, I think, was a great character, and the actor who played him definitely was able to go all out. Neil McDonough, I think he's great in the role, but especially in this episode, or in this season, he was pretty great. His redemption arc near the end of the season, it worked really well, and he was kind of a placeholder as the villain because they couldn't really use Mullis for the entire time as in his full form because he is a full CGI monster. It costs a lot of money, so I think Damien Darhk did a great job at being a placeholder for that, and they just did a great job with this character, a lot better than they ever did in the past.
Are you gonna let your buckhorn finish this for you, Mr. Queen?
You don't have to do this, Oliver.
We both know that I do.
Constantin Kovar was a great secondary main villain and a great main villain in Arrow Season 5's flashbacks, which I think are pretty great. It's a pretty great year of flashbacks. Not the best year, as we haven't seen the Season 2 and 1 villains, but I think Constantin Kovar was a pretty great villain. I think his rivalry with Oliver was pretty great. I think that his role in the flashbacks in Season 5 was pretty great, like the lead up to him and his reveal and like how menacing he was trying to be, or he was going to be in the season. I think it worked really well, and in the finale, when Oliver and Kovar were going head to head, how it switched between Prometheus versus Oliver and Kovar versus Oliver, similar to how they did that with Slade and Oliver in Season 2's finale, I think that really worked, and Kovar ended up being a pretty good villain for the Season 5 flashbacks.
Keep those people down there in those cells.
It's my work. I need them.
What work?
I am going to save the human race, Sarah.
The main villain of the Arrow Season 2 flashbacks was kind of Slade Wilson, but since he is actually one of the main villain, he is the main villain of that season, I'm not going to include him in this list. Instead, I'm going to include the secondary main villain of the Arrow Season 2 flashbacks, so the secondary main villain in Anthony Ivo, who I thought was a great character. The actor who played him was great in the role. His motivation, his storyline, everything about him was so good. My only problem is that he died before he can create the android Amazo, but it turned out Amazo was already created by him or something, I don't know. In Elseworlds he did show up, so that problem is kind of thrown out the window, and I think Anthony Ivo was a pretty great main villain, or a great secondary main villain for the Arrow Season 2 flashbacks, and a great way to get into Slade Wilson and his origin story and how he became the main villain of the flashbacks, as well as Season 2 of Arrow.
You've wanted nothing more than to leave this island, and now you can. I can call in a rescue ship, you can go home. Tell me, Mr. Queen, are you prepared to sacrifice your freedom for her?
And with the best year of the flashbacks being Arrow Season 1, we have the best main villain from the flashbacks, Edward Fyers, who had a great rivalry with Oliver Queen, and the actor who played him was also pretty great in the role. I really like this villain. I think that he served as a great first antagonist for Oliver to face getting into his origin story, and he had a great rivalry with Oliver. His connection to the storyline was really, really good. I liked his motivation, and basically everything about him. I thought he was just a great antagonist and a great first villain for Oliver to take down.
Is this where you killed Max Stanton? What are you doing? If you stick that in me, I'll kill you.
No, Brother Roy. You'll kill for me.
Sebastian Blood, aka Brother Blood, was the villain for the majority of Arrow Season 2, with Slade Wilson kind of pulling the strings in the background, being ahead of Brother Blood, but up until episode 15, it was mainly Brother Blood who was the main antagonist, and I think that worked really, really well. I think Sebastian Blood, the actor who played him, he's a great actor. He's also in Lucifer. He does a great job in the role of Brother Blood, and Sebastian Blood, who are kind of, they feel a little bit different in terms of how they act. I really like the storyline of the season with the Mirror Crew, how that connected to Slade Wilson in the flashbacks and Roy Harper and everything about it. I think that his mask looks pretty cool, and although he's incredibly comic book inaccurate and he's a Teen Titans villain being used for a Green Arrow, so is Deathstroke. Really, I really think that he worked really well as the secondary main villain for Arrow Season 2.
And I'm gonna make sure that this time I finished the job.
While Ricardo Diaz was a relatively okay villain in Arrow Season 6, I thought that he really shined in Arrow Season 7 in the first 7 episodes, but especially in Episode 7. I think that although in Episode 1 he was kind of embarrassing how he was unable to kill Felicity in a scene that he really should have, other than that, I really like this character and his storyline. His rivalry with Felicity was honestly not that bad, but his rivalry with Oliver in Episode 7 was pretty awesome. The scene where he shows up at the talking station where the people can talk to prisoners, that was awesome. The rivalry was really shown, the fight between them, everything in this episode really, really worked, and it made Ricardo Diaz a great secondary main villain of the season. But this episode also kind of felt like the true season finale to Ricardo Diaz as a villain storyline between episode 13 of season 6 and episode 7 of season 7, and because of that, I think that if that was an actual season, Ricardo Diaz would have been a lot better as a villain than I actually look at him as the main villain of season 6, because this episode, he had a great rivalry with Oliver, he was pretty badass, and he was an awesome secondary main villain.
And I go free.
We don't need a dagger to stop you.
Well then, let's just see how much your father taught you.
But by far the best secondary main villain in the entirety of the Arrowverse is Eobard Thawne, aka the Reverse Flash, one of the 2 secondary main villains of The Flash Season 5. Eobard Thawne was kind of pulling the strings behind the scenes, where he was manipulating everybody in the show. Is Cicada version 2, Nora, Barry, everybody who's manipulating, and all so he can just escape prison in the future and escape being executed. All that build up, that storyline, how he was manipulating Nora, that storyline with Nora and and Barry, the conflict there because of the Reverse Flash. Eobard's rivalry with Barry was so showcased in this season, it was insane. The final episode, where right after they defeat Cicada, the episode really ramps up because the Reverse Flash is back and he escapes from prison, and that whole conflict. Reverse Flash is so much better as a villain in this season than the actual main villain, Cicada version 2, or even the other secondary main villain, Cicada. It is laughable, and he kind of a little bit feels like the main villain, but I would say he is the secondary main villain, and since he is by far the best secondary main villain the Arrowverse has ever churned out in The Flash Season 5, and honestly, he should have been the main villain. Like, Cicada version 2 should have been a secondary main villain, while Reverse Flash is the main villain. I think that would have made the season a lot better if they had done that. Like, maybe they defeated Cicada version 2 in like episode 15 or something, and then the Reverse Flash goes on to, or maybe they defeat Cicada in episode 15 and the Reverse Flash goes on to be the villain for the remainder of the episodes. I think the season would have been a lot better if they did that instead of waiting till the very last episode near the middle, but still, Reverse Flash is definitely a great secondary main villain. So anyway, what do you think of my list, and let me know what yours is in the comments down below. And if you like this video, make sure to leave a like, share, and subscribe, and thanks for watching.